So kung titingnan mo yung pagdating nila dito, talagang nangangailangan sila. Hapong-hapo, gutom na gutom, uhaw na uhaw. Kung hindi pinakain ng ating mga ninuno, yung mga namamatay na crony na Magellan, wala sana tayong pinag-uusapan na First Circumnavigation of the world, na achievement ng siyensya at ng sangkatauhan.
Binisita sila ng taga-suluan ng Magellan Expedition and there were exchange gifts. Yun ang ngayon ang sineselebrate ng humanity in Humonhon.
Ang description ni Pigafetta, 1,500 na taga-Mactan coming from 3 sides. Talagang ginamitan ng talino at strategiya ng ating mga ninuno sina Magellan.
Ngayon, nagkakaroon tayo ng reorientation and refocusing ng ating kasaysayan, kung saan binabalikan natin ang ating kasaysayan sa lente o sa vista ng mga sarili nating mga manunulat at mga historiador.
currently live on almost 100 Facebook pages, primarily at the National Quincentennial Committee, Department of Foreign Affairs, and other foreign posts, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, among others. So, Sir Ian, we are going to start our preliminaries. territories of Philippine toponymy with history and geography. Today's panel is anchored on Southeast Asia in the 16th century on situating Filipino and the Philippines in 1521. Speaking of Southeast Asia, the region is geographically and ethnically diverse, having a good climate with a perfect combination of mainland, islands, and islets. Islets provide the maritime traders and explorers to discover the natural resources in the region. The work of Watson and Daya showed several small islands in eastern Indonesia were once the source of cloves, nutmeg, and maize. Moreover, the Southeast Asian population includes a wide variety of ethnic groups and cultures. This diversity is related to its position as a focus of convergence of land and sea routes. Indeed, Europeans had documented several Southeast Asian historiography that focuses on what is now the tangible and intangible resources in Southeast Asia. As we celebrate humanity and victory, this session will bring us back to time where intangible cultural resources are worthy of documentation. These topics are Putika Saat, based on the Sulat Sug or Jawi materials from Sulu, to be presented by Professor Dr. Hayrula, and Situating the Maranao in the 16th century Southeast Asia, to be presented by Professor Dr. Caballero. Now let us going to begin with our session by introducing to you our speakers. Our first speaker for this morning session is a Professor 6 of History, Department of History, College of Arts and Social Sciences, Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology or MESU IIT. He holds a PhD in History degree from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He held various academic and administrative positions at the MESU system. He was once a chairperson of History Department of MESU Marawi in 2002 to 2003, and subsequently the chairperson of History for 6 years, starting from 2009 until 2015. He is currently the campus secretary and the chief of staff to the Office of the Chancellor of MESU IIT. During his stint as IPDM director, he was able to implement more than 100 peace-building projects with local and international partners, particularly Germany, Japan, and the United States of America. He has written and published several articles related to peace and conflict studies in Mindanao. He has been consistently working with the formal and informal peace States of America. He has written and published several articles. He has been consistently working with the formal and informal peace review, Professor Dr. Giovanni Alicaya Caballero.
Thank you, Dr. Tangian, for the very generous introduction. Well, it appears that allow me to share my screen first. So you can see my PowerPoint presentation. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you can see on screen, the title of my paper is actually Situating the Maranao in 16th Century Southeast Asia. The Maranaos are the second largest of the Moro groups in terms of population. And they were actually the last to succumb to Western colonialism. They were known as valiant warriors against the Spaniards, against the Americans, against the Japanese, and even later, no, against the Philippine government, no. But unfortunately, the Maranaos are nowhere to be found, no, in historical records covering the period 16th century. So this led me to ask the question, where were the Maranaos 500 years ago? Were they non-existent? Were they too insignificant to be noticed by in my investigation, I realized that there was only one document ever written in the 16th century that has reference to the Maranaos. And this was the letter of the military commander Juan Ronquillo to Governor General Antonio de Morgan, dated January 4, 1598. As a background, Juan Ronquillo was actually the military commander assigned to head the Tampakan garrison. Remember that there was a attempt on the part of the Spaniards, no, in the they happened to put up a garrison between what used to be the Sultanate of Buayan and the Sultanate of Maguindanao. This was Tampakan, and it is located between these two, Maguindanao and Moro strongholds. But there came a time when the Spanish garrison was running out of provisions. So Ronquillo had to go to the interior part of the Pulangi River and try to confiscate whatever they can confiscate, no, from the villagers, from people, and of course subjugated any resistance, no, that they encountered. And that's how he was able to mention something about the Maranaos. And this is what he wrote. No? Sabi niya, in order to collect this, meaning the food items, no, and the provisions that they needed in the garrison, in order to collect this, all the men had to pass onto the Great Lake. And the annotation was that the Great Lake actually refers to Lake Lanao, for which this island is famous. And as the fame of our works had spread throughout the whole island, two chiefs, meaning two chiefs from the Maranao chiefs, no, had actually come down to the lake to say that they did not wish to fight with the Spaniards, but to be their friends and pay them tribute. Thus, I hope through God, more than 2 decades, no, to mention again about Lanao or the Maranaos, no? And this was the in the chronicle of Fray Luis de Jesus, no, who said in his chronicle, no, and this was written in 1622, the island called Mindanao rivals that of Luzon in size. It has flourishing villages, especially along the shores of the rivers, which are large and not few. One which flows out from the famous Lake of Malanao. In the Austronesian language, sometimes the R is interchanged with the letter L. No? So the Malanao here actually refers to the Maranao or the Maranao. No? The Lake of Malanao is larger than the others. The lake is formed from other rivers which dash down from the mountains. The shape of the lake is oval and its circumference 50 liguas or more, according to report. Its greatest diameter is only 16 liguas, with its points and bays, and without the latter, it is only 12. In short, the lake is considered as one of the most famous in the world. Of course, there are other Spanish documents written in the later parts that would mention about the Maranaos, the encounters of the Spaniards with the Maranaos, the missionary activities in the Maranao areas. But I also tried to look into other sources, other than the Spanish, and I have encountered the journal of William Dampier, written in the later part of the 17th century. There, by the way, William Dampier was a British explorer who was able to visit Mindanao, and it was actually in Mindanao that William Dampier tasted the durian for the first time. And in the chronicles, or in the journal of William Dampier, he mentioned a group of people he called the Ilanunes as people who live in the heart of the country. So you take note that the Ilanunes, as we know them today, are actually coastal dwelling people in the southern parts of Mindanao. But here, William Dampier was saying the Ilanunes lived in the heart of the country. Later on, I will explain to you how the Ilanunes or the Ilanuns or the Iranuns are related to the Maranaos. I also looked into Chinese documents, the works of Chao Jukwa and others. And unfortunately, while there are a lot of references that talk about Chinese references that talk about certain place or islands in the Philippines, unfortunately there is none that has reference to the Maranao or the Lanao, except one, and this was an 1178 Chinese document which mentioned the Sea of Malano as inhabited by savage robbers called Malano. And some scholars are saying this Malano is actually Malanao, who were in the habit of going out to the high seas for plunder and sell their prisoners to Shopu. Now, according to Isaac Donoso, who mentioned, who examined this document, the Sea of Malano here definitely refers to the Malano or the Malanao, the Malanao area of the Borneo and Mindanao area. And speaking of this, I just remembered the Maranao scholar Manuel Tawagon, who actually had invited some Malaysian visitors, Malaysian guests, and when these guests of his talk to each other, he was wondering how come he could understand them. And so he asked, "Were you speaking in Bahasa Malaysia?" And the guest said, "No, we were talking in our native tongue." And then Tawagan was saying, "What you are speaking is practically the language that I am speaking." And it turned out these are Iranuns from Malaysia. And later on, as I've said, I will explain to you what's the relationship between the Iranun and the Maranao. We know, of course, James Francis Warren, who wrote about the Iranun and the Balangini. And James Warren helped us explain why the Maranaos were not written in many documents that cover the 16th century. And in fact, he was saying before the end of the 18th century, scant documentation is available. Until then, the Maranao remained little known to Spanish invaders, European travelers, and traders because of their upcountry agricultural orientation. They were a people just beyond the pale or out of reach. Take note that the Maranao population center is in the heartland of Mindanao. And we know that in those days, in the 16th century, there were no, highways or good roads, with which to, penetrate the Maranao country. And according to him, the term Iranon or Ilanon had come to be applied to all Maguindanao Sulu raiders of the late 18th century. But in Dampier's age, the term Iranon applied only to someone who was part of the encampment of the Great Lake Lanao. And in this sense, many 17th century Iranon were not actually Ilanon but at all, but Maranao people of the lake. So this is James Francis Warren noting about Dampier's observation that the Iranons lived inland and not the coastal areas of southern Mindanao, of the Iliana Bay, where we know them to be presently residing. Now, the Maranao scholar Manuel Tawagon helped us dissect the connection and the confusion between the words Maranao and Iranon. And the words of Tawagon, he said, the words Iranon and Maranao are related. The relationship is associated with the story of Radia Indarapatra, who is the pre-Islamic ancestor of the Maranao, who came to Lanao in search of his brother in the epic Darangan. You know the epic Darangan, this is the pre-Islamic oral tradition of the Maranaos. No? And because his brother was a stranger to the place, because Radia Indarapatra rather was a stranger to the place and far away from home, Radia Indarapatra would feel homesick while he was in the Lake Lanao region. No? And this homesickness is actually pakaranon in Maranao. The word is pakaranon. The root word of ranon, the root word of pakaranon is ranon, which means loneliness. In Maranao poetry, Lanao is referred to as Iranon Katunggawan, or the cold, lonely place. And this is also the root of the Maranao word Iranaunin, meaning Tagal, Taga Ranao, which means a person who comes from Ranao. In its contracted form, the Iranaunin becomes Iranon. And this is also the reason why many of the contemporary Maranaos, traditional leaders like the Sultan sa Masibay, Haji Ali Nur Mamay, was saying, the Iranons and Maranaos are one and the same people. We were just differentiated by our geographical orientation. The Iranons lived in the coastal areas, the Maranaos lived in Lake Lanao, but we practically speak the same language, we practically century. Just look for references that would talk about the Iranoni in the 16th century as well. Because as demonstrated in the works of Tawagon, in William Dampier, in James Francis Warren, they were one and the same people. And even by contemporary traditional leaders among Maranaos. Okay. So I would like now to situate the Maranao in 16th century Southeast Asia. Okay. I just read somewhere that history is very exclusive, they say, because we have the tendency to confine history to the written records. And they were saying, the critics are saying, this is very discriminatory to the people who were not included in the written records. And that's the reason why I feel those critics. And this is the reason why I would like to use their argument in saying that the Maranaos may not be in most 16th century records, but that does not mean they did not exist. Okay? The Spaniards in the 16th century were limited in movement and of course in terms of their time. Their arrival in 1521 was a quick one as they hurriedly left the archipelago after the demise of Magellan in Mactan. The succeeding expeditions of Loaiza, Saavedra, and Villalobos were too preoccupied in fending for themselves to survive, while the more successful expedition of Legazpi was too busy trying to conquer the coastal areas of Visayas and Luzon. There was not much time and resources with which to further explore the interior of the bigger islands like Mindanao. And since the Maranao population and power centers were concentrated in the interior, there was little chance for the members of the pioneering expeditions of the 16th century to meet them. If they saw them from a distance in the coast or high seas, they must have not recognized them. Or even if they recognized them, they must have been lumped with other peoples. No? Like, for example, Francisco Combes, no, who is a popular source, no, among Filipino historians, he actually subsumed the Maranao under the Mindanao category, no, when he categorized the peoples of Mindanao into four. No? He said the Mindanao is inhabited by the Caragas, the Mindanaos, meaning the Magindanaos, the Lutaos, and the Subanos. Okay? But in the 10th chapter of his book, he mentioned that Don Pedro Manuel Manook, the founder of Iligan, no, and an ally of Spain, originally from Dapitan, conquered the village of Bayog. Okay? He conquered the village of Bayog, which is now part of Iligan, that belonged to, these are his words, no, that belonged to the Malanao nation, who were subject to the Mindanaos, or subject to the Magindanaos. Of course, the Maranaos wouldn't accept that, that they were, subject to the Magindanaos or part of the Magindanaos. No? It can be deduced then from these chapters that Combes lumped the Maranao together with the Magindanaos. Okay, so the Maranao population, as I've said, were concentrated in the high seas, etc. There is one thing that I'd like to emphasize here. Take note that Warren describes the Maranao dash Iranon as the Lord of the Eastern Seas. And as the Lord of the Eastern Seas, no, they were known to they were known for their navigational skills. No? And these are skills that cannot be earned overnight. No? They are known for their fighting prowess at sea. And again, this cannot happen overnight. So in other words, if the Maranaos and the Iranos in the 16th century were already noted by the European explorers and colonizers, no, that these were the kinds of men that the Iranos and the Maranaos were, then they must have been roaming around Southeast Asia for quite some time already. So andun na sila, they have already mastered the seas of Southeast Asia. Hindi kasi ito nangyayari ng overnight lang, yung paano mo i-navigate, no, yung dagat, at paano mo i-master yung pakikipaglaban, no, sa dagat. Now, so going back to the question, where were the Maranaos in the 16th century? Again, the Maranaos were busy establishing and strengthening the Pangampong Curanao, or the Pangampong Curanao. By the way, the Pangampong Curanao, for those who are not familiar, this is the traditional socio-political organization of the Maranaos, where they govern themselves. No? According to some scholars, this is a kind of a federal system of government where there are many autonomous political entities, okay? And somehow they have an unwritten constitution that would govern the social order of these political entities. And this makes the Maranao unique from the Magindanaons and the Tausugs, no, of Sulu, because the Tausugs, the Sulu and the Maguindanao Sultanate had a centralized form of sultanate. Lanao has a sort of federal setup, no, in the institution of the Pangampong Curanao. No? Now, according to Tawagon, the Pangampong was established in the 15th century, around the end of the 15th century. And from the establishment of the Pangampong until the arrival of the Spaniards in the 16th century, the Maranaos were defining their domain, no? Strengthening their socio-political setup and expanding their sphere of influence. The map that you can see here is the traditional, depiction of the Pangampong's territory, no? And somehow the northernmost portion of the territory covers Iligan. Okay? But in a separatist study that I conducted, it turned out that the Pangampong has even a larger territory that would extend up to the area of Taguluan in what is now Misamis Oriental. The first municipality right after Cagayan de Oro, north of Cagayan de Oro, that's the Taguluan. So as you can see, the map here makes the coastal areas of most of the coastal areas of northern Mindanao, from Panguil Bay to Iligan Bay to Makahalar Bay, ay Maranao Bay. Anyway, let me go back to the previous slide and tell you about what the Maranao sources are claiming. That at the height of the Pangampong's power, the domain of the Pangampong Coronao reached as far as the town of Taguluan, and its people were even familiar with important places like Kumidigdig-Aig, which they identified as Cebu, Daguwatan Auray, which they identified as Iloilo, Madarab Akalinan, Leyte, Luwakatan na Indao, Samar, Bagumbayan Alina, Luzon, Natangkupan Aragat, Mindoro, Minilalansay Alina, Palawan, Sulug, Sulu, Gindulugan Amarugong, Borneo, Bugabong Akumara or Formosa, and Diundian Atina or China. Take note that these places, if they were accurate identifications of the contemporary names of these places, take note that these are important places in Southeast Asia and in East Asia. And if the Maranaos are familiar to these places and they even have their own names for these places, that means the Maranaos have not been confined within the lake region as we think them to be. They were already roaming around Southeast Asia and even beyond. So that's the argument. Now, in the 16th and take note, as I was explaining to you, I already explained to you earlier that Panguil Bay, Iligan Bay, and Makahalar Bay, if it was accurate or if it was true that the Pangampong's territory reached even up to the town of Taguluan, take note that beyond Makahalar Bay is already Butuan Bay. And we know the relationship between Butuan and China. And so if the Chinese traders were, visiting every now and then Butuan, and we also know that Sulu had a good relationship with China, and that's the reason why China is familiar with Sulu. And we even know that there was, one Sulu Sultan who visited China to pay a tribute. Take note that between Butuan and Sulu, there is this body of water off the coast of northern Mindanao. And if it was indeed a Maranao Bay, it was indeed a Maranao body of water, then it becomes a natural sidewalk, or maybe a sea, how do we say that? Because it's a body of water, a seaside, probably where the Maranao traders are waiting, and probably they would exchange with trade goods, with the Chinese traders who are traveling from Butuan to the northern coast of Mindanao, going to Sulu. So there. Whether the access of the Maranaos to the Chinese trade was direct or indirect, that is still yet to be established. I must admit, that's very difficult to establish. But what is certain nonetheless is that stories about Chinese Maranao contact abound in the oral testimonies of many Maranao informants. Take for instance this one. This was narrated to me by the Sultan sa Masibay, Haji Ali Nur Mamay, who said that the Nunungan that you see as sparsely inhabited now was exactly its opposite in the ancient times. Nunungan was a thriving community center where trade was flourishing. The umoy, by the way, is the Maranao term for jars, the big jars. And we know that most of the Chinese immigrants, in the various parts of Southeast Asia, came from, the Chinese city called Xiamen, and Xiamen used to be known as Amoy, and probably, because of language corruption, every time the Maranaos would see these, porcelain wares brought to them by the Chinese from Amoy, they say, Umoy, Umoy. So that's the theory. I remember there is another informant who said, I remember my grandfather told me that my ancestors buried 50 Umoy jars in Kabasaran. This is narrated to be by a Maranao Pananalsila, or a genealogy expert named Dato Karim Alando. Kabasaran, when this place was attacked, our clan used to own many of these jars with blueprints, but because of the attacks, they had to bury and leave them behind. And so on and so forth. Now, these are just examples of the commentaries. Well, going back again to the question, where were the Maranaos in the 16th century? Again, the Maranaos were participants in the Islamization process of Southeast Asia. We know that, the Islam came with Arab traders and their local converts who came to South Asia and then to island Southeast Asia, and eventually from Borneo they would go to the realm of the Sulu archipelago, which included Palawan, and that is the reason why when the Spaniards arrived in Manila in 1570, they already realized that the city of Manila was already ruled by a Muslim rulers, Raja Sulaiman in particular. Okay. Scholars like Mahul and Gawi suggest that Muslim merchants who were trading profitably in the Malay world had reached Borneo and probably some islands of the Philippines by the 10th century. Gawi even said that there is evidence to show that some Arabs had reached China from some islands in the Philippines during the 10th century. And as early as 710 AH or 1310 AD, Muslims were already present in the island of Holo. And this is indicated by the presence of an old grave on Buddha dated 710 AH or Anyu Hejra, and venerated by local Muslims as the grave of a foreign Muslim, probably an Arab. And this suggests that at the beginning of the 14th century, there was already a settlement or colony of foreign Muslims on Holo Island. And from Holo or from the Sulu archipelago, these Muslims would eventually go to Mindanao, where the Maranaos are located. It was, of course, believed that Sharif Kabungsuan was the one who introduced Islam in mainland Mindanao. And he would eventually become a leader in Cotabato, a recognized leader in Cotabato. In fact, most of the Maguindanaos, the Iranuns, and the Maranao people would consider Kabungsuan as the one to be given credit for introducing their ancestors to Islam. And in fact, Kudarat, the great-great-grandson of Kabungsuan, would inherit the domain of Kabungsuan and become its first sultan. And this will become the Sultanate of Maguindanao. Kudarat, take note, would eventually form marriage alliances with the Maranao-Iranon royalties. And that's the reason why there are Iranons who are claimants to the Maguindanao Sultanate. And take note that the sister of Sultan Kudarat, named Gayam, was married to a Maranao from Butig, which is a place called a place south of Lanao del Sur. This is where the clan of the one who initiated Marawi since are living or residing. No? So, it's in Lanao del Sur. Butig is a municipality in Lanao del Sur. And Nuni Amatunding, the leader of that place, married the Sultan Kudarat's sister, Gayam. No? And like the Maguindanao and the Iranoons, the Maranaos would claim that they were won over to Islam by Kabungsuan's influence. No? And indeed, Kabungsuan's arrival on mainland the mainland Mindanao in the succeeding centuries. So what can we conclude out of these mga circumstantial evidences and conjectures? No? First, while colonial sources do not mention the Maranao as an important historical actor in the 16th century Southeast Asia, the Maranao knows, or more appropriately, the Maranao believes that he was a participant in the making of history of that period. To the Maranao, he was an active partaker of the China trade, a recipient of Southeast Asia's Islamization, and even a developer of an ancient political system that academics now call federal. To the Maranao, his ancestors were not aloof, isolated dumb people who were thoughtless of the bigger world such as Southeast Asia. As a matter of fact, the Maranao was naming places in his own terms. Kumaydigdig which was Cebu, Bagumbayan Alina, which was Luzon, Sulug was Sulug, Gindulungan Amarubong was Borneo, Diondian at Ina was China, and so on and so forth. All these are the Maranao's proofs that he did not confine himself to the lake region. Rather, he and his ancestors traveled, traded, raided, and lived adventurous lives. The only drawback was that his adventures were not written down on paper, as he preferred to relay these mostly through words of mouth, where important details get omitted and fantastic elements are added. I think that ends my paper presentation. Thank you everyone for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Giovanni Caballero. Thank you so much for touring us into the geographic space of Mindanao, in southern Mindanao, and as far as Southeast Asia. And your argument on saying Southeast Asia and beyond, whether these Maranaos were very much active before the coming of the colonizers or the Spaniards. Thus, Southeast Asia and beyond, the role of Maranao is again another aspects to be studied for the researchers. So for the meantime also, thank you so much for sharing your insights with regards to the archival sources and archival materials with as far as not only among the friars written about the Maranao ethnicity, but also as far as that of the Chaujokwas records that you really had been established together with putting into testimonies with those of the elders, or as far as our key or your key informants were concerned, no? That is in Iliana Bay area as well. So for our Zoom attendees, this is really a challenge, and actually a sort of a challenge to us in order to study further not only the Maranaos but even other ethnicities in Mindanao, particularly Tausug, the Maguindanao, the Ilanon, the Kulibugan, and the rest are actually 13 ethno-linguistic groups which they really had shared common geographic space, but at the same time they have distinct distinct cultures and identity. Administration is concerned. That is a great comparison for us to study further. And lastly, all those relationships in terms of ethnicity, the nomenclature has semblance with regards to that of Southeast Asia, wherein we really can study it as far as the Austronesian identity of this language and ethnicity is concerned. So this is a challenge to all our attendees and future researchers on Mindanao. So thank you so much, Dr. Giovanni A. Caballero. So for the meantime, to our attendees, please, you are encouraged to ask questions to our speakers. You may use the Zoom chat or the Q&A for this purpose, please. You may also use the chat to post your comments and insights. Now let's going to proceed to our next presenter. Okay. Our next speaker is currently an assistant professor of history at the Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. He obtained his PhD in Philippine Studies, major in history from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Master of Arts in Islamic Studies at the same university, and his Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration degree, major in economics at the Mindanao State University, Sulu campus. He had published 4 books on Jawi materials from Sulu with Dr. Samuel K. Tan as co-author. He worked as research associate of the Mindanao Studies Program, Center for Integrative and Development Studies, or SEEDS, before he joined MSU IIT in 2012. He teaches history of Islam and specializes in Mindanao, Sulu, and Palawan history and culture, or Minsupala. Dr. Hairula had attended and presented papers both in the national and international conferences. Among those papers were presented at Winzhou Ursuline University of Languages in the province of Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and in the 40th National Conference on Local and National History held at the National Museum of the Philippines in Manila in 2019. He is currently involved in research collaboration on Sulu Jawi documents with the School of Oriental and African Studies, or SOAS, University of London Research Team, England, the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to introduce to you Professor Dr. Munap Hambali Hairula. The floor is yours, Dr. Hairula.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Changyan, for a very kind and beautiful introduction. So, okay. So thank you very much. Before anything else, I'd like also to greet our universal greeting. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to all participants for this morning conference. So my topic is about pagsaat, or sometimes we call that kutika. So what is kutika or kutika? So the kutika tradition, traditional cultures of portraying Sulu, has been part of the Tao's daily life engagement. Be it business related, socio-political, and others. So conducting such a kutika ritual before initiating activity has been a vital role in the Tao's tradition. It is similar with the Chinese feng shui or horoscope to revealing a person's character or fortune. In Sulu, this tradition is called kutika or pagsaat, which is one of the living traditions known as pusaka kamaasan, ancient heritage preserved in
Dr. Moon? Dr. Moon, may I,
parang naano yung PowerPoint na.
PowerPoint presentation, please. Hindi talaga na-move.
Oh, yeah.
Okay na.
Yes.
Ito.
So,
Thank
sorry
you so
for
much,
that.
sir.
Oh.
Thank you po.
So, yeah, in Sulu. So, it is a kutika, as I said, is one of the living traditions known as in Sulu as pusaka kamaasan, or ancient heritage preserved and ethnographic or indigenous materials from Sulu, called kitab, written in Jawi or sulat so script. The Putika traditions, or in some areas, to look at it, Putika, in which symbols like child or animal are used in meeting events or consequences in both healing, has become a vital element of culture and identity. This particular tradition has continued to persist despite the presence of belligerent attitude in the area against it. However, based on the post-police survey of 2023, no single studies thus far has been made on this particular subject. Thus, this paper hopes to describe the method or technique as well as its contribution to the better understanding not only of the Tausug culture and identity, but also the Asian as a whole based on ethnographic sources called Kitab, written in Tagalog or Jawi script from Sulu. So the method used in this short paper is an archival. Archival method, with the qualitative approach utilizing, as I mentioned, ethnographic materials known as Kitab, Insulatsog, or Jawi region tradition from Sulu as primary source. The Kitab are preserved in private collection or possession of some elders Sulu who are still considering Tausug Adat or post-colonial tradition a relevant component of the Tausug identity. These are used as manuals by elders in guiding the people in the community in conducting adat rituals such as putika or pagsaat to ensure safety in fruitful daily life activities, either business related or political and other factors of individuals in the Tausug society. So the type of putika as indicated in the Kitab from Sulu are three. So far we have identified three putika. One is what we call putika buangan. It has something to do with novellistical reading. And second, putika isalan naga. It refers to something, the movement of a giant sky dragon. And last, kutika sa haribulan. Something to do with astrological character of foreseeing. So this is sample, we got it copied from the Jawi from the Kitab. It's about putika buangan, buangan. This classification is indicated in the Kitab. In the Kitab, buangan is similar to the concept of numerology, which uses numbers to interpret a person's character or to predict the future. Using a method analogous to that of the Greek and Hebrew alphabet, in which each letter is represented by a number or numbers, as you notice here. In this Kitab, the Sulatsog alphabets or characters are represented by a series of dots, as you notice in this sample or in this figure, indicating the number of its later to be calculated. So if a certain individual or couple would ask what will happen to their future, the mangungutika or the foreseers will inquire with the couple's name before conducting that putika ritual. So after calculation, that is short, if the result has a remainder of one, it means the man who will die first. If two, the woman. That's according to this putika buangan. So another putika identified in the kitab is what we call putika isalan naga. Okay. We have here a copy of the certain take from the original kitab. So this is parang simple drawing showing that what the also called naga, giant creatures above. So this putika, in the kitab, it narrates in this kitab that Isalan Naga is believed that Naga, the giant sky dragon, rotates 4 times in a year. And its rotation, according to this putika, have direct implication to human activity and its results. For instance, if it may indicate either a great favor or misfortune to an individual's endeavors. So hence, doing the Naga's movement provides essential guidance to people in the community to avoid adverse circumstances. In some details, allow me to narrate in Tausog a few lines. Pasal ini isalan sin Naga. Ang katahon makaupat magpili based on this state. Sawal yung kaida unyang pautara. Without reading the page in this further or details. It means for the month of October to December, its head faces towards north, in the tail towards south, in the stomach toward east, and its back is on the west. Okay. So for instance, if one has to travel or fight a field, he should make sure that the place he is situated in is not in the direction where the Naga's head or mouth is facing. This is so because it is believed that one's luck will likely be eaten by the Naga. However, the circumstances will be advantageous to the one if he is located in the directions of this dragon's back or tail, as it would suggest that this dragon is less likely to disturb his luck. Additionally, it is also nahas dakula, in Tausog term, for great misfortune or bad luck, according to this putika, to build houses or business endeavors in locations that face toward the head or mouth of the sky dragon. So in other words, everyone must be watchful of the quarterly change of movement of this giant dragon, or what we call Naga. So the last putika identified in this kitab is what we call putika sa haribulan. Putika sa Haribulan. This Haribulan, in which symbols and the formula are used in relating the events to consequences in portraying. As you can see, we have what we call mon, what it is people. Some of the events are linked to the prophet's time and context. So in page 47, for instance, this type of kritika is described as, allow me to read a few lines. 5 hari bulan, buwan, kaputika yan in Adam, no, kandoy niya iban kasisin, Allah. And 6 hari bulan, kabaw, 7 hari bulan, ambaw, and 8 hari bulan, and so on. So, it means the 5th day of the month corresponds to a cow, and the day when Prophet Adam was sent down to earth by God, means bad luck. In the 6th day of refers to Ikarabaw, and in 70 to Imaus, in 80 to Lam, in the Sitira. So, this Kutika explains that the corresponding animal or animal of the day, or term as Satwa in Taoto, has an influence on the person portion in luck. For instance, the 5th day of the month represented by the cow is accordingly unfavorable for traveling or any engagement because the cow is deemed slow, hence is lacking the travel of it. So at the same time, the 5th day is also when Prophet Adam was sent down to earth by God. So on another note, the 10th day of the month is highly considered as beneficial to travelers, as it is represented by the powerful dragon that imbues strength and luck among travelers. So without discussing this in detail, in conclusion, the paper reveals that the Kutika tradition is an essential part of the Taoto adapt or custom and tradition that antedated the arrival of Islam. It is one of the living pusaka or heritage passed through generations by the Kamaasan or forefathers. However, now it is its existence is endangered because of the rarity of its records, divination practice among the new generation, and the emergence of new technology and religious form within. Hence, it is necessary for us to share and preserve as part of our cultural heritage that may serve as a bridge and a mirror to relate ourselves to the entire Asian culture and identity. So with that, most of all, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muna Pairula, for sharing to us on the tradition among the Tausug and specifically on the indigenous knowledge system that has been preserved and at the same time restored as far as these scholars are concerned. So it would be in the hands of the scholar wherein these particular materials could be still been studied and at the same time shared to the public. So thank you so much for painstakingly sharing with us, specifically on the writing, the scripts, the writing system, wherein some of your research says that has been in relation to the Javanese or Majapahit system. So as far as Southeast Asian is concerned, there's actually still semblance of these scripts, but needs to be studied as well. We need future researchers on this particular aspects on the indigenous knowledge system. So again, this is part of the intangible materials or intangible resources worth for the preservation of our from the academe and as well as from the National Commission on the Culture and Arts and the NHCP as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Hairula. Thank you also to Dr. Giovanni. This time, I would like to invite Dr. Giovanni to open your camera so that we can discuss with regards to our Zoom attendees' concerns. Specifically, they had several appreciations here, and somehow one was saying that your materials were for publication, so this is for future future consideration or future discussion as far as publication is concerned. So thank you so much for that. So they had a lot of appreciation. This time, we are going to read some of Mindanao themselves.
Am I supposed to answer this orally or verbally, Ma'am Sil?
Yeah, you have the
Okay.
floor.
Actually, I have already written an answer to this question. I'll just read my question, my answer or reply. First and foremost, whoever asked this question is an intelligent person. He has a good question. And I think the understatement of Chinese influence on the Maranao people, by the Maranao people themselves, is relatively a recent development. And this has something to do with the Islamic resurgence or Islamic consciousness, which began in the late 1960s and the 1970s. The strong discouragement by the Maranao ulama or the religious leaders or religious scholars on the many Maranao traditions that obviously have Chinese influences, like for example, the so-called unta, which is actually a camel game, the kandidiaga, which is actually the practice of hiring, professional mourners or crying ladies, ginagawa yan sa Maranao, yung pag may namatay tapos malaking tao yung namatay, mga babae na may malalakas na boses, hinahire yun para umiyak at para enumerate yung yung good deeds niya, kung gaano siya kabait na tao or kagaling na tao. And this is there are no other people in Mindanao who practice this one except the Maranaos. And whether this is cultural parallelism or cultural diffusion, that remains to be answered. But with the proximity of China to Mindanao, I would really think that this is, a case of cultural diffusion where some of the cultural traditions of China were being adapted by the Maranaos. They also have the Naga, which is also a common ng Sulu, yung dragon na in fact yung panulong, yung wooden beam ng turugan, may mga design yan, and one of the famous designs, popular designs ng turugan is that of the Naga design, which is actually the dragon ng mga Maranao. And this is an indication that these are old traditions, pero recently dinidiscourage ng mga ulama. Prior to the 60s, old Maranao people still narrate of the camel or unta game, which resembled that of a dragon dance of the Chinese. Pag merong kasal, pag merong enthronement ng sultan, gumagawa yung mga tao ng parang mascot ng camel, tapos merong mahabang cloth, and then people would, the players would get inside the mascot, and hide under the cloth, and then they would dance, along the streets, and then this would resemble the dragon dance that the Chinese people do, no? During, you know, Lunar New Year, the Chinese New Year, and other festivities, no? During funerals, no, the crying ladies are hired to mourn for the death of a big man or a big woman, no? The pusaka tradition or the heirloom, no, na-mention ni Dr. Hayrula yung pusaka. Pusaka ay yung mga kung sa ano po yung mga pamana na mga ari-arian o ng mga bagay-bagay na considered precious by the family. This included ceramic wares, no? Yung mga umoy at saka yung mga tinatawag na mga marano na mga pinggan, no? Or yung mga ceramic wares, no, na mula sa China, no? And take note that the Chinese wares, no, especially during the previous centuries, no, bago naging uso yung mga Unitap, yung mga Unicity, at saka yung mga iba pang mga cheap, you know, products na mula China, no, the Chinese wares, particularly silk and ceramics, were considered prestige goods by many Southeast Asian polities, by many Southeast Asian people, no. And as such, bilang prestige goods, this is considered as a source of Maranao maratabat or Maranao pride, no? Maranao honor. Oy, meron kami nito. Hindi lahat ng mga tao nakaka-obtain or nakaka-procure ng mga ganito. And that explains why it's considered part of the heirloom or the pusaka, no, ng mga Maranao, no? And of course, I do not know if this is fortunate or unfortunate, but you know, the recent ulama or the religious scholars who recently graduated from, you know, the Middle East, Saudi in particular, no, and other parts of the Middle East, are saying that, you know, some of the things that your ancestors practice are un-Islamic. And that's the reason why you don't see the Maranaos now designing their houses with the dragon design. Kahit nga yung mga jars na pag merong animal design yan, dinidiscourage yan. Kung mari yung mga floral designs na lang or geometric designs na lang. No? In short, yung pag-understate, no, ng mga Maranao sa impluwensya ng mga Chino dun sa kultura nila is a recent development. So yun po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Juban, for your answer, at the same time for the clarification and information, as well as those lectures that you had. So in relation to Naga, here is a question to Dr. Muna Pairula. Sir, you mentioned about a sky dragon called Naga. Is there any relation to the other identification of water bodies associated with Nagas that are mostly observed in the mythologies of other Asian countries? Sir Mon, I would like to repeat the question to Sir Muna Pairula. Sir, you mentioned about a sky dragon called Naga. Is there any relation to the other identification of water bodies associated Nagas that are mostly observed in the mythologies of other Asian countries? This is for Sir Mon.
So maybe my answer to that question is maybe there is relation because as Dr. Giovanni just mentioned a while ago, pusaka or including this what we call intangible knowledge, no, or pusaka actually was there is a influence from Chinese, no, or from other Asian regions, meaning itong mga putika na ito is maybe originated from that area, from China. It is about Feng Shui. So it is a relation with that, or it is similar to what we call Feng Shui. So if you talk about dragon, as Dr. Giovanni mentioned, it is parang sinapaniwalaan ng lahat ng Asiano that there is a certain giant animal, what we call naga, no, and yun, including Chinese or what. So if you just question is there any relations of the naga with other nag-mention in other Asian regions. Parang ganon. So may iisa lang, no? I think this is the same concept of the same, they refer to the same animal, giant, what we call naga. So mga ganyan. I don't know if I answered that question right.
Thank you, Dr. Munap. Here is a question from Vincent Marie Marzonia to Dr. Caballero. Is the Marnao Pingampong comparable to the disputed Madjaas Confederation?
Madjaas Confederation. I don't know that. Forgive me. But what's the Madjaas Confederation? I don't think they are similar. That's the first time I heard of the Madjaas Confederation. What I know is that the Pangampong Coranao served as the socio-political organization of the Maranaos, quite unique to the Maranaos. If there are similarities with the other political systems, well, probably these are parallelisms, and or probably these are parang indicators of cultural diffusion. After all, if the Madjaas Confederation is within Southeast Asia, take note, guys, that the boundaries of Southeast Asia are very porous. And remember that the boundaries of what we now call Southeast Asian states are artificial. They were made just recently. No, they were made just recently. And before, there were no boundaries. And that's the reason why you would see that there are badjaus in the Philippines, but Filipino badjaus. There are Malaysian badjaus, Indonesian badjaus. Okay? And there are Filipino Iranons, and there are also Malaysian Iranons. No? And probably because these people were roaming around Southeast Asia, and when suddenly the modern nation states put up, the walls and the boundaries, they were already trapped, in these boundaries. And but yeah, diffusion, the concept of diffusion, kumakalat yung kultura, and therefore you would see that there are certain practices among groups of people na magkapareho doon sa ibang kultura, no? Especially if they are within a contiguous area or a contiguous region. So yun po.
Thank you, Sir Giovanni. So here is a question to Sir Munap. Is there a way we can access the kitab of Isteno, which you take as reference of your presentation? Sir Mon? Is there a way we can access?
We can access. Yun na nga, it's very, I think the province of the kitab nowadays is very rare, no? And that's why last time I was invited by SUAS University. Meron silang project, parang collecting all those mga old scripts in Southeast Asia. In what they were doing is they are digitalizing that mga old scripts. So the question of accessibility, maybe yun, if we can do that, digitalize those old scripts or kitab, maybe I think in SUAS University, all those digitalized scripts are parang accessible na in public. Parang yun ang ano nila. I don't know now if they have done that completely, that project. But yun ang aim nila is to be so that the public could access those old streets in Southeast Asia, including Surato, one of the scripts we translated is from Sulu, no, Jawi script. So yun isa sa mga sasalit nila dun sa project nila, yung digitalization of those old scripts in Southeast Asia. So we hope kung matapos nila yun, maybe we can access those scripts or those Jawi in Southeast Asia. But so far ngayon, no, bro, dito sa Philippines, wala pang na project or effort to digitalize those mga scripts so that would be accessible to those. But ang ano lang is, in my case, halimbawa, paano kinulate yung mga kitab na yan, ay we intutulo, no? And ask the elders who have that kitab, nakikiusap ako, and then he allowed me to photocopy that kitab. So I use that kitab. That's why I have a few collections here, but I don't know, I cannot say na pwede ko ano sa kanila paggamit. No? Maybe isa sa mga project natin, no? I think we can do that, no? Digitalize so that yung mga those who want to use this, they can access.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Muna, for that development, sharing to us the preservation of that particular documents. Thank you so much. Here is another observation and at the same time question from an anonymous attendee. This may be answered by both of you, Dr. Giovanni and Dr. Muna. I had watched a video of a particular show in I think one of the Muslim country. One of the hosts said that Muslims in the Philippines are fighting for their autonomy for more than 450 years. What can you say about this? Is it safe to view the Filipino Muslims like this or by other Muslim countries?
Abi, gusto mong mauna?
Abi, ikaw na lang muna. You can do the honor first.
Yeah. I think there is no dispute. No, there is no dispute that the Muslims in the Philippines have been fighting for autonomy. No? At the beginning of the program, you notice that we were even singing the Bangsamoro hymn. No? And to me, my hairs are standing up, no? Because it gives me goosebumps. No? And autonomy is not bad. No? For a democracy like the Philippines, and any other country for that matter, autonomy is not bad. No? It's just like giving you a little freedom within the house. Okay? Katulad nung, halimbawa, yung mga anak natin or tayo, nung naging adolescents tayo, gusto natin na meron tayong sariling kwarto kung saan we can be ourselves. No? We can choose the color of the curtains, the color of our bed sheet. We can listen to the kind of music that we prefer, di ba? Autonomy is just like that, no? And therefore, it's not bad for a country. Mas okay nga yun kasi nai-empower yung mga tao na hindi lang sila dependent on the national government. And that's true for 150 years, no? Because since for all throughout the Spanish period, hindi naman talaga sila na colonize. There were instances na natalo sila sa giyera, but wala talagang control ang mga Spaniards over the Moro population. Meron silang mga forts na kinonstruct dito sa may Jolo, even Cotabato, pero beyond the walls of those forts, the Spaniards did not have control. Okay? And when the Americans came, the Americans succeeded in subjugating the Moros. They were integrated forcibly into the so-called Philippine Republic. Pero ang naging reklamo nila is that, teka muna, yung national food ng Pilipinas, which is lechon baboy, is haram to us, no? Hindi namin kinakain 'yan. Yung Philippine flag, for example, sinasabi nila hindi kami represented diyan, o yung star na maliit doon sa sulok ng isang triangle, hindi kami represented diyan, no? So, yun yung feeling na nag-udyok sa ibang mga Bangsamoro to feel na hindi kami mga Pilipino, or kung gusto niyo na maging Pilipino kami, let us govern ourselves, no? And this is the essence of autonomy, no? And now we have the Bangsamoro, and it is an enhanced autonomy. Hopefully, the Bangsamoro people will feel that empowered kami by the national government. Binigyan kami ng konting space sa national government to be ourselves, to govern our people the way we want to be governed. No? So may mga ganun pong mga issues. Actually, napakalawak, no? Napakalalim sana ng discussions natin dyan. Pero in the interest of time, yun lang muna ang masasabi ko. Autonomy, take note, is not bad for a democratic country like the Philippines. No? In fact, it is an epitome of democracy. Kasi ang essence naman ng demokrasya is you empower people. No? You govern, the government is by the people and for the people. Ang autonomiya po ay isang example ng kung saan ang mga tao mismo ang nag-govern sa mga sarili nila. And I think that's a good exercise of democracy here in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
sir.
hope I was able to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Giovanni. So if ever you had a very few insights, Dr. Munap, kasi we still have line up of questions over here. And okay, so still we are going to accommodate your questions then. So Sir Munap, if you have some insights in relation to autonomy. Parang nawawala na si Sir. Okay,
Yes,
Sir.
ma'am. Good morning.
Please, insights.
Dr. Giovanni and Dr. Caballo writing had explained already, why we still, the Bangsamoro people still aiming to establish what we call autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Sir Munap. Let's proceed to the next question. How can we make those knowledge be included to the present lessons in the different educational institutions? Because those are not known by so many. So these are just, how can we make? Okay, I'd like to repeat. How can we make those knowledge be included to the present lessons in the different educational institutions? Because those are not yet known by so many. In terms of who can answer this one?
I would like to answer, Ma'am Sil.
Yes, Sir Ju.
If it's okay with you.
Yeah, Sir Ju. Yes, okay.
I know that the Integrated History Act of the Philippines is now a law, and therefore it has to be implemented. And I think DepEd is really encouraging people to really develop instructional materials where the Bangsamoro there's a lot of answers that has several steps. Like for example, I've seen some comments here asking for copies of our presentation. So probably the first thing that you can ask is NHCP to probably publish this, reproduce this, the papers that were presented in this conference into a published material, and disseminate this to the different divisions of the Department of Education, or even the Commission on Higher Education for the different higher education institutions. And second, you cannot just integrate these things on your own. It needs careful planning. It needs discernment to really, pick the necessary informations that would be beneficial or that would be appropriate for the grade levels of your pupils or your students. And so a write shop or a workshop would be necessary to realize the dream of coming up with good instructional materials that incorporates all the indigenous people's history and the Bangsamoro people's history into the so-called Philippine history. And you know what? Isisingit ko na lang din ito, no? Kasi ang iba kasi nagrereklamo, sabi nila, ay, hindi nga namin ma-cover yung buong coverage ng Philippine history, tapos dadagdag niyo pa yung Bangsamoro history at saka indigenous people's history. Alam nyo ang dahilan kung bakit yung ibang mga Pilipino ay hindi nila nafe-feel na mga Pilipino sila? It's practically because of that. Every time binabasa nila yung Philippine history, hindi nila nakikita yung Philippine history bilang kasaysayan nila. Kasi hindi nila nakikita yung mga sarili nila doon. Yung kanilang mga karanasan, yung kanilang mga kwento, yung kanilang perspective. Kung nakikita man nila yung mga sarili nila doon, especially in the old books, no, in the pioneering books ng Philippine history, nakikita nila yung mga sarili nila bilang mga wild tribes to be tamed, yung mga villains at saka mga masasamang tao, mga pirata na dapat i-neutralize, and that hurts, and that does not help in the idea of nation building. Sasabihin nila, uy, Pilipino ako kasi ganito yung pagka-describe sa amin ng Philippine history. And so I'm calling on everyone, especially the teachers here, napakalaki ng responsibilidad natin para gawing inclusive yung Philippine history, para ma-appreciate ng maraming mga Pilipino na iba-ibang grupo, iba-ibang kultura, iba-ibang pinagdaanan, iba-ibang hugot, para makita nila Philippine history is
with regards to the inclusion, probably to the curriculum, specifically in the levels, high school level, elementary level. Okay. I think that was sermon.
Can I say something? I don't know how to do the chat or the question and A. This is not it. Dr. Churchill.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Both papers are terribly interesting and imparted a lot of knowledge that is not available to a lot of Filipinos. I serve as the chair of the Technical Committee for History of the Commission on Higher Education. And one of the things that our committee did several years ago was, even before the passage of the law, recent law, which was intended to include in the study of history the indigenous communities as well as the Muslims, I included several new subjects that would refer particularly to what is missing in our history. In other words, study indigenous communities, study Muslims in the Philippines, study what is Islam, put them in the context of our general history so that everybody is covered. It is up. I mean, this is supposed to be adopted officially by all universities in the Philippines which have a Department of History. I hope that it is being implemented because CHED has not been able to. We have not put together a monitoring system for this. So that's one. Now, for teachers, I think it is important. Maybe we can all get together. I'm a retired teacher, but I'd be happy to help. But maybe we can get together in several workshops along the way, when we are free and we are able to get together and put a syllabus together that will reflect the whole Philippine community that is then going to be available to our students so that they know even just the preliminary knowledge of who are really Filipinos. And it's not just us. The others in this country are also Filipinos, even if they have a different religion, a different customs and all that. Let's get together. You can start in your own departments, I feel. put together a list of readings. Make it simple. You know what I did, and Monap knows this. I want to know how Philippine history is taught in Mindanao. And I asked for copies of your textbooks because I want to know, okay, so you teach Philippine history in Mindanao. What do you teach about the rest of the country which is not Muslim? I wanted to see that. I haven't really gotten very many copies of books. I would love to, because I think it is important that the initiative comes from us. We know what the students need, that the students should know, and we can provide them with materials that are not too complicated to be understood. Because you're dealing with Philippine history in a grade school, in primary level, we have the K to 12. It should start there, and then we move on to college. But we should tell them that this is the Philippines. It's not just us. This is the Philippines. The rest of us, and we're all Filipinos. Yun lang. I'd be happy to help, and I hope I can get back to Manila soon. But even, just send me emails. But the Commission on Higher Education has a new syllabus which should be implemented by departments of history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Churchill, for that development. We are very much honored to invite you in our future workshop.
I would love to come. Yes.
Thank you.
Bring me back to Manila, and I will go. I will go. Yes.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that. So that is a great development. We are going to spearhead with that promise from the Department of History and issue IIT, and specifically addressed to the curricular structure to the levels, to the high school and elementary level. So thank you so much for that. That is our next step, and we are very much inspired because nandyan kayo po. Maraming salamat po. Thank you po, Dr. Churchill. So let's going to continue with regards to some questions here. So marami pang nagkaka-interest sa mga questions here. Kunti na lang. I'm going to read at least na lang siguro 5 questions. So what is the influence or role of Islam in diminishing the local cultural traditions and beliefs of both the Maranaos and Tausugs, just like the Christianization for local communities where some traditions were barred or forbidden? How do we revive them? Just a brief answer from Dr. Caballero and Dr. Munaf kasi this has been, I think, explained well kanina.
Yeah, very briefly, Ma'am Cecil, no?
Yes, sir.
Kasi ang nagiging kalaban ngayon ng mga tradisyon na kinoconsider ng mga ulama ngayon bilang un-Islamic and therefore ay yung attitude na yun nga, no? Yung parang very narrow interpretation of Islam, no? And therefore, to address na para hindi totally outright i-ban yung probably i-consider siya bilang isang academic na na lang. Like for example, paano ba to? Yung actually sensitibo yung question na yan, Ma'am Sil, no, na kumbaga ang magiging kalaban dito ngayon ay yung mga religious scholars are saying na yung mga Naga, yung even ang sari manok, no, na simbolo ng maize, no, ng Mindanao State University ay inaano yan bilang haram or bilang prohibited sa Islam and therefore dapat i-destroy yan. But I think these are the kinds of religious interpretations na medyo sa tingin ko personally sa tingin ko ay medyo narrow, and that's the reason why kung ang mga tao ay talagang they're clinging on to religion and therefore susundin yung sinasabi ng mga ulama, at least man lang ma-document ng mga academic institutions na nasa Mindanao, nasa Bangsamoro area. Kasi sayang din naman yun na wala man lang traces ng material and non-material culture na matira dahil sinasabi ng mga religious scholars na ito ay haram and therefore ano. I'm not saying na i-practice pa rin no yung mga halimbawa yung kandidiaga, yung crying ladies no. Personally sa tingin ko rin no, medyo may mga un-Islamic elements nga yun. Pero at least man lang para hindi siya tuluyang mawala ay ma-document man lang ng mga academics no. So yun ang ano, documentation of this vanishing aspects of the local indigenous Bangsamoro cultures.
Okay, thank you, Sir Giovanni. So that question is coming from PIA9 ARD Rene Carbayas. Okay, so okay. I'd like to read questions na lang, and then I think our speakers is going to synthesize all of this because some of the questions are actually been repeated. So like for example, are there indications of Islamic influence from China since it has said that the Maranaos had earlier dealings with China? This has been explained earlier. And then another thing, sir, I will read everything and then probably you're going
Yes,
to keep
please.
insights na lang, sir, because there are several questions and appreciations over here to Sir or Doc Giovanni Caballero regarding to the heirlooms, swords, clothing, malong, waving materials, and souvenirs. Why is the Maranao tribe readily available for the public to offer? Whereas the other tribes, primarily Lumads, in some extent, very protective and secluded from those materials and dresses. What can you say about this, Doc Giovanni? Okay, and then anyway, galing to kay Giovanni Keputong. Okay, I'm going to read further. Isahin na lang ni Sir Giovanni ang kanyang explanation. If we from Palon Marie Andre, if we want to learn Ijawi script as introduction to Philippine writing systems, can you tell us what good sources should you recommend? This is for Dr. Munap, no? I repeat for Dr. Munap. If we want to learn Ijawi script as introduction to Philippine writing systems, can you tell us what good sources should you recommend? And then I'm going to read what over here. This is, I think, appreciation. More and more young Filipinos are learning indigenous writing systems and welcoming the languages of where they are or their parents grew up, learning apart from Tagalog, Bisaya, or English for that matter. What do you think is the future indigenous languages in terms of those that are in Mindanao or in the Bangsamoro area? Not forgetting that many languages in the Philippines are still viewed as dialects. This is from an anonymous attendee. And then, how about the provincial dialects? There is also an anonymous attendee here. How about provincial dialects? Is it included in history or is documented in local provincial historian? And lastly, is there any from an anonymous attendee? Is there any detailed Maguindanaoan folk stories or history that we have here? This is just a question. Okay. Now, I'd like the speakers to synthesize all of those questions. And those are the last questions to be answered by our speakers. Thank you so much. Now, you have the floor, Dr. Giovanni, please.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Sil. No? There were several issues raised. No? First is that why is the Maranaos more open than the other tribes in terms of allowing outsiders to access and to see and to view the heirlooms, the other material or tangible cultures, no? Well, I think the Maranaos, take note, are a people of Maratabat. They take pride of the things that their ancestors achieved, no? And that's the reason why when outsiders come and manifest their interest to see these things, the Maranaos would proudly present them. No? And so far, no. But take note that not all Maranaos are that welcoming. Like for example, when an outsider asks to see the Tarsila or the Salsila, or the genealogy of the families, not all can access, except perhaps if you have a very good connection, you have earned the trust and confidence of the family or the clan. Pero yung malong, yung mga ceramic wares, they readily that because these are prestige goods na pwedeng kumbaga sa Bisaya ipasigar mo, with pride you can display to the world, no? Something like that. Why would the other tribes, especially indigenous peoples, would tend to be more guarding and more cautious in showing outsiders of their material culture? This is probably because they have had some bad experiences with outsiders, bastardizing their own cultures. Like example, I remember an anthropologist. Well, I do not know. Maybe he's a quasi anthropologist, because he forgot to respect the Koano. He was doing research on the indigenous dances. And then the indigenous peoples, for example, were complaining that after making himself very popular because of the dances of the indigenous peoples, he did not even go back to the community to pay tribute, to pray, to offer something, for the anitos and the diwatas of the tribe. And to them, kumbaga, nagkumpiyansa yung mga in good faith, they shared their culture, and then somebody became so popular, earned money out of it, and did not even pay their necessary tribute to the tribe. And the tribes had several sources of anxiety because of these incidents. Another thing, not only the heirlooms, but even the other heritages, like for example, mga sacred caves, indigenous peoples are really anxious that when outsiders know these places, they would tend to, vandalize, they would abuse, they would, throw garbages there, here and there. And so these are the sources of insecurities, for the indigenous peoples, and we cannot blame them because there had been incidents in the past where outsiders have not shown respect to the people. Do this to the Maranaos, I do not know what will happen to you. No? So that is probably the reason why the Maranaos are more open, because the Maranaos are also open. No? What you see is what you get. When they are angry, they will really declare rido on you. No? But the indigenous peoples, they're so trusting, and then suddenly outsiders bastardize their heritages. I think I also saw one question, Ma'am Sil, which you did not read, but I think I can immediately give a quick reply.
That was it. Okay.
Yung absence ba ng written records among the Maranaos is an indirect defense against colonization. I do not see that as being the case of the Maranaos, because meron naman talagang written tradition or mga system of writing ang mga Maranao. Kung ang taga-Sulu, as mentioned by Dr. Hayrula, meron silang Jawi, the Maranaos and the Magindanaos have the Kirim. So they have the Kirim. These are based on the Arabic script, pero meron mga improvised na mga characters kasi sa Arabic walang NG na vowel, yung nang. So they have to invent another character for it, Kasi yung Kirim at saka yung Jawi, these are using Arabic scripts pero gamit ang language ng native or ng indigenous language, And yung mga salsila ng mga Maranao, nakasulat naman siya in Kirim. Kaya lang mukhang naka-confine lang ang Kirim doon. Hindi siya nag-evolve into something na ginagamit ng karaniwang tao pag nagko-communicate sila. So, the Maranao people, just like many other Filipinos, apparently remain to be an oral people. Sino ba sa atin ang nagsusulat dito ng diary natin o ng mga daily journals natin? Except perhaps for Ma'am Nita, no, whose memoirs will eventually be published siguro. No? Pero yung ordinaryong tao, yung ordinaryong Pilipino, yung mga hindi ba sa pag nangutang tayo sa tindahan, yung iba nga hindi nga nililista eh, no? Basta may utang ka sa atin, ganun lang, no?
Lista sa tubig.
And so that is probably not the case, no, in the case of the Maranao, no, na depensa ba ng mga Maranao yun dahil natatakot silang ma-discovery, no? I don't think that's the case, no. It's just that they prefer the oral, way of transmitting information. Thank you. Sermon, Dr. Hayrula, it's your turn now.
Dr. Caballero, Abi? Hello?
Yes, Abi, mayroon mga questions kanina na binasa ni Dr. Tangyan?
May problema dito sa internet. Okay, regarding Dawi publication, anong tanong? Anong question natin?
Okay.
So,
So,
there are a lot of Dawi publications. First, si Dr. Tan actually published a series of Dawi publications in UP. So if you are asking where we can...
Kanina final na ni. Yes, sir. Sermon.
Oo.
We can hear you.
Okay. But if you're asking about manual, parang guiding us how to write the script, so far, parang wala pang na-come up na ganun. No? Something like manual on how to write Jawi script, something like that. Although there mayroong mga attempts, but hindi na-realize, parang maybe one need to come up with something like the manual.
It's about time, Abi.
Webinar, we need to revive. We need to revitalize that Jawi or sulat songwriting system because nakalimutan na adi, no? Because we have now adapting ad writing system, Roma Western. So wala nang that's why I see it. This is a vanishing tradition. It's about ibang ganon. So but we need to preserve this because it is sayang. It's part of our identity. If you're talking about Bangsamoro, about nation building. So this is part of our identity, part of our culture. So why should we?
We will count on you.
Yeah, because I've heard earlier that you really started to digitize all your materials there, Sir Munap. You really had researchers in Sulu. So I hope that will be the first step. Sir Jub?
There is one interesting question here asked. This question is for anyone. The history and culture of the Philippines is exclusively only for Luzon and Visayas, but why am I getting the impression that our history and culture in Mindanao, that is obviously rich, is less represented in any of the textbooks in the Philippines education curriculum? Why did this happen and how will we be able to change this present status? Let me answer this very quickly, Ma'am Sil. No?
Yes, sir.
Unang-una, yung mga pioneering na mga scholars, pioneering na mga writers, kasi we cannot blame the people, our counterparts from Luzon and Visayas, no? Because sila yung nauna sila yung mga especially on the part of the Bangsamoro and indigenous peoples, no? Ang parating reklamo is that dapat Bangsamoro ang magsusulat ng kasaysayan ng Bangsamoro o yun ang mga indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, yung mga naunang na-educate, ay hindi mga Bangsamoro, no? Especially mga taga Luzon at sa taga Visayas. Sila yung mga naunang na-train sa scholarship, kumbaga. And in fact, maalala ko yung during the American period, di ba? Nire-require ng mga Amerikano na magpadala ang bawat pamilya ng isang bata sa Maranao, for example, no? Para pag-aralin, no, ng mga Amerikano. Ang pinadala ng mga Maranao na mga pamilya ay yung mga slaves nila kasi natatakot sila na magiging Kristiyano yung mga anak nila, no? And so, yung may mga kaso na yung mga anak ng mga slaves ang naunang naging doktor, naunang naging engineer, naunang mga profesor, no, sa dito sa Mindanao. In other words, kaya may ganong sitwasyon sa ngayon dahil sa ang naunang sumulat ng kasaysayan at saka ng mga libro ay yung mga scholars natin, no, na nakabase sa Luzon. And we should not feel bad about it kasi we have to start somewhere and somehow, no? Hindi naman pwedeng maghihintay pa tayo ng taga Mindanao talaga na sulatin yung kasaysayan ng Mindanao. What if walang magka-interest, di ba? So yun yung sagot doon. Of course, that is slowly changing, no? That's slowly changing. We have a lot of scholars from Mindanao who see the Mindanao perspective, who are using the Mindanao lens of seeing things, no? And that is the reason why this is starting to change, no? A lot of books are being developed, no, or written nowadays. I am engaged, in fact, with several history book writings, no, na on Mindanao history. Kasi nga dahil dito sa Integrated History Act of the Philippines ng 2016. Kailan lang ba nabigyan ng pansin ito? Only in 2016. And we cannot change the situation overnight because we're talking of centuries or even decades, no, ng book writing na do-dominate ng mga scholars from Luzon. And because they are from Luzon, probably they missed some dimensions na hindi nakikita ng mga taga Luzon pero nakikita ng mga taga Mindanao. But again, this is still a contribution to the furtherance of knowledge. Kung ano ang kulang na ginawa ng mga taga Luzon or ng mga taga Visayas or even ng mga foreigners, because James Francis Warren, you have William Henry Scott. These are foreigners. No? Hindi nga sila Pilipino pero sila ang nagsusulat ng kasaysayan ng Pilipinas. And we should not, kung merong mang gap sa kanilang mga nagawa, tayo ang pupuno doon. Kung merong disagreements tayo sa kanilang ginawa, isulat natin yan at i-disagree natin yan sa kanila. Mali itong sinulat ni William Henry Scott or ni James Warren doon tungkol sa mga Iranon, etc., etc. And that is how scholarship will thrive. No? One perspective against another perspective. Our, intellectual capacities will become dynamic, will be enhanced, in other words. So we welcome every contribution, but again, at the end of the day, it's important that we also have our say. Hindi pwedeng sila lang magsasalita, hindi pwedeng sila lang magsusulat. Kung meron tayong dapat isulat na natin yan. Kasi kung Facebook lang tayo, hanggang Facebook lang tayo, hanggang chika lang tayo, hanggang oral tradition lang tayo, wala, no? There are elements that will be omitted, there are details that will be omitted, that will be forgotten, and there will be fantastic elements that will be injected into our historical, experiences. At yun ay magiging questionable din. So it's about time that we start, a writing culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Giovanni. Thank you so much for telling us on the challenge of writing Mindanao historiography, as well as pinpointing all those sources, either foreign or national sources. That is very much important also as a significant benchmark to our future writings. For our future writings, actually. But it seems that our speakers wish to answer more questions. What I am saying is that I want to integrate all those questions. But however, there are still a few questions over here. But I just wanted to read na lang Sir Giovanni and Sir Muna. And then if you really can comment this, because somehow you already had answered this in your previous discussions, actually with regards to language dialect. But I'm going to read this one for the benefit of our attendee. Now, for an anonymous attendee, how about provincial dialects? So first and foremost, meron pa ditong sinabi dito. What do you think is the future of indigenous languages in terms of those who are not in Mindanao and in the Bangsamoro area, not forgetting that many languages in the Philippines are still viewed as dialects? So parang na-answer na ito kanina pa. So how about provincial dialects? Is it included in history or is it documented in local provincial historian? So again, this has been discussed earlier. Is there any detailed Maguindanao folk stories or history that we have here? So this is again another point of reference for another historiography on the Maguindanao. And then lastly, for putting, Giovanni keep putting, Maranaos mainly are business people. Is there any parallelism on this? Perhaps. So parang comments lang yan. But then you may or you may not answer with regards to that, Dr. Giovanni and Dr. Muna, because you had already lectured that and somehow give an example with regards to this Mindanao historiography as ethnicity language as concerned. I'm just reading this one for the benefit of those attending here. Now, in addition to that, for Dr. Merong mga chat dito, and this is actually an appreciation and somehow an invitation, and I'd like to read this one. For Dr. Giovanni and Dr. Muna, warm greetings po from Brunei Darussalam. I am from the Philippine Embassy here, and your lectures is very interesting. Would you be able to do a lecture on Brunei and the Philippine ties, pre-colonial? There are so many similarities in the Malay language and in our music and culture here in Brunei. So later, sir, I'm going to give you a brief answer on that, no? With regards to your response. So I'm going to read another here. I'm so sorry for this. There is, all right, may sinasabi dito. Okay. Superhighway. Thus, we should educate the youth to become critical thinkers, the way they don't be misguided by these unreliable sources and references. Okay, those are informations, the do's and don'ts of history. So what is important is facts. Okay, it was a great proposal from Dr. Churchill. The Muslims' historical narratives must be included in the teaching of Philippine history. Thank you so much for that. Truly, mas naniniwala pa sa mga vloggers na with regards to an invitation from Brunei Darussalam. Okay, some sort of collaboration, sermon.
Yes, it's okay. No? It's nice. No, if we can establish that collaboration.
Munap and Sir Giovanni. What has been researched by our presentation of our certificate of appreciation to Dr. Giovanni and Dr. Munap. Sir Alec, please. Ma'am Jen, please. For the meantime that they are really preparing, I'd like to announce that for our attendees who reaches 310 for this morning, okay, you can deleted from the roll of those will be given certificates. So for the meantime, of course, the e-certificates are now ready, Sir Alec and of course, Ma'am Jen. But if there would be problems with regards to technicals and other simulations there, we are going to send them because of some technical problems in Manila. That's why we really started late, okay, at 9:30 because of the technical problems in Manila, specifically in the area of where in its city is located. AM. And thank you so much, Dr. Bernardita Churchill. Talagang good night po talaga there at Washington District of Columbia, and you're really guiding us in this particular academic intercourse. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Glad to do it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Churchill. So, okay. Probably I'm going to have my summary and synthesis. Ancient heritage, pusaka kamaasan as practiced by the Tausug and the Asian antedated Islam. Putika or putika, the traditional way of foretelling a story, is a customary and traditional practice of the Tausug. The kirim, on the other historiography. It can be gleaned from 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 the email addresses of our speakers so that you can reach them Don Alfonso, Joseph Alec Heradila, and Geneva Orizar for your help and support. I would like also to thank Dr. Gregorio E.H. Dilpilar, President in RCP, and my colleagues of Division 8 Social Sciences for the support and for your presence. On this note, I would like to end this panel A of session 6 and would like to invite everyone to attend this afternoon's session, panel B, still on Southeast Indies and the loss of the Indians, a first approach to urban organization in the Philippines from Universidad po sa lahat. And that ends our session A of this panel. Thank you very much for our future academic engagements. Thank you, Sir Giovanni. Thank you, Sir Munaf. Thank you very much, Dr. Nita Churchill. Thank you so much. See you in the future. Thank you, Sir Alec. Thank you, Ma'am Jen. Where are you? Okay, nandyan pa ba kayo?